Hi and welcome back to Heimler's History, and welcome to the last topic video of Unit 8 for AP World History. Now, all through this unit, we've been tracing that great global conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union called the Cold War. And in this video, we're going to see how that Cold War thawed and came to an end. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. Now, there are many complex reasons why the Cold War, which had dominated the world stage for over 40 years, came to an end, but we are only going to focus on three. First, we'll look at the military and technological development of the United States. Second, we'll look at the failed Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And third, we'll look at public discontent and economic weakness in the Soviet Union. Okay, first, let's have a look at the military and technological advancement of the United States. So by the early 1980s, the United States and the Soviet Union combined had produced over 12,000 nuclear missiles, and all of those missiles were pointed squarely at each other. Now, a major consideration that kept their fingers off the launch button is that they knew that if either of them launched, whichever one of them started the war, neither of them would be alive to finish the war, because if a nuclear war occurred, it would result in mutual assured destruction. Even so, it was still tense between these powers for a very long time. And so in the 1980s, US President Ronald Reagan spearheaded the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI. It was a system that rendered any attack on the United States obsolete. Now, how would it do that? Well, the SDI sought to launch defense systems into space that could detect a nuclear launch and then shoot them down from space with, wait for it, lasers. They were going to shoot down nuclear weapons from space with lasers. I kid you not. And therefore, it shouldn't surprise you that the detractors of this plan dubbed it Star Wars. That's no moon. It's a space station that will blow your crap up with lasers. But as it turned out, this was going to cost way too much, even though they did start spending on it, and the technology for it to be achieved was way too far in the future. And so the plan was eventually scrapped. However, the announcement of the plan and the steps that they did take in that direction had the effect of shifting power to America and away from the Soviet Union. Okay, a second reason the Cold War ended was because of the failed Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So in 1978, communists led a coup in Afghanistan and established a communist government. Of course, this government was heartily supported by the Soviets, and this new government enacted repressive policies and became deeply unpopular with the majority of the people. The result of this discontent was that in 1979, the Soviet-friendly president of Afghanistan, Nur Muhammad Taraki, was murdered by his second-in-command, Hafizullah Amin. Amin then became the president, and he was patently not Soviet-friendly. And so in December of 1979, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, killed Amin, and set up another Soviet-friendly president. This action was roundly condemned by the United Nations, but the Soviets were never ones to take a wrist slap seriously. And so the Soviets remained in Afghanistan trying to squash rebellions throughout the country. But the problem was that they found they couldn't gain much ground against the guerrilla tactics of the Afghans in the vast Afghan wilderness. Now, because of this, the war stretched on for a decade, and it put a tremendous strain on the Soviet economy, both because of the fighting and because of all the economic sanctions the rest of the world was putting on them. The Soviets ended up losing this battle of attrition, and many historians point to this as a major cause of the fall of the Soviet Union. Okay, the third cause of the end of the Cold War was public discontent and economic weakness in the Soviet Union. Now, even before the economic turmoil that I just mentioned, the Soviet economy had been in a bad way since the 60s. Foreign trade was extremely limited. Government control of agriculture stifled that industry because farmers didn't have control over what to plant or how much to charge for what they did harvest. Additionally, Eastern European countries in the Soviet bloc were growing more and more discontent with the repressive policies of the Soviet Union. An example of this is the Prague Spring, which was a series of mass protests in Czechoslovakia in 1968. The Soviets violently crushed this outcry, but the sentiment was spreading and they were having to devote more and more resources they didn't have to putting down these rebellions. And with these three causes pressing hard against the Soviet Union, it was ripe to collapse, and the end came about like this. In 1985, a more liberal Russian came to power in the Soviet Union, and his name was Mikhail Gorbachev. He championed two programs that would ultimately undermine the Soviet Union completely. The first was perestroika, which allowed for some elements of free enterprise in the Soviet economy. The second was glasnost, which allowed for the opening of the political process and the granting of more freedoms. And these policies created the occasion for more freedom in Soviet-controlled countries as well. It meant that the Soviet Union would no longer come to the aid of communist regimes in Eastern Europe. And once some of the economic freedoms of perestroika were felt in some of those countries, they wanted some more. And so democratic reforms began sweeping through all those nations and even wound up affecting the Soviet Union itself. And in December of 1991, the Soviet Union was officially dismantled and the Cold War was over. Alright, that's what you need to know about Unit 8, Topic 8 of AP World History. A review packet right here that's going to help you get an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May. All you got to do is click your finger out and click it. And if you want me to keep making videos on your behalf, then subscribe and I shall oblige. Heimler out.